And welcome on in, everybody. It is the Check Your Brain podcast, and my name is Tony Mazur. If you are watching on the video there, that is my podcast logo, the Check Your Brain podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. I've said podcast like 87 times already. I understand that. But go check me out. I'm on YouTube. Here, I'm on Rumble. I think I'm going to start putting my videos up on Odyssey as well. The audio version is available wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that fun stuff. And I also have a Patreon. So if you want more episodes featuring me, and sometimes only me, but sometimes you'll get a guest that comes in a couple of days, maybe a week early. You get early access to that for just $3 a month. Go to my Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur. That is my name. I am Tony Mazur, and I am joined by a gentleman his name is Zach Arnold. And Zach, you are kind of like a Renaissance man. You're like a new Renaissance man where you're doing a bunch of different things. You're in the world of music, comedy. You have your own YouTube page and videos and stuff
Yes.
like that. So welcome aboard.
Thank you for having me, Tony. I appreciate it.
So you have I'll share the page here, The Incredible Impressionist, The
Correct.
Incredible Impression, I should say. And it's on YouTube, and go check out some of your videos and your shorts. So give us the backstory. Who are you? What can we get out of you? It's like the whole elevator pitch. Like, tell us about Zach Arnold while I'm on the elevator as I'm going up a couple of floors.
Well, let's see. I'm a man. I like women. And no, I'm
That's good to know. Well,
oh
it's
yeah,
very good to know nowadays.
absolutely. I got my impression background from seeing the legendary impersonator comedian Rich Little doing a show called The Presidents. And this was right after George W. Bush took office in 2000, 2001, somewhere around there. And he did all these presidents on stage with supporting actors, and lady played co-star of his played the first lady, and he came on, did all these guys in costume from John F. Kennedy right on up to George W. Bush. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, I'd like to be able to do that, and he did all these voiceovers and stuff for the play too. Like he did Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Jimmy Stewart. Oh my gosh, there were so many of them. And but it was very, very moving for me to see all of this happening. And the very first person I ever impersonated actually was Ringo Starr in a Beatles tribute band. Two tribute bands I was in, one from Ohio called Abbey Road, and the second was called Beatlemania the Invasion out of Pittsburgh. I did those. I was in Abbey Road from 2007 to about 2010, 2011. And I was in Beatlemania the Invasion for about less than a year. That band didn't really pan out too well. Um, but then I was supposed to go back into the tribute industry this past summer, but we ended up scrubbing the idea because things just didn't work out according to plan. So in the meantime, I got contracted with Stephen Joyner. He's now my publicist, and what a great publicist he is as well. I got to give him the credit.
You get to be
Uh,
booked on fine shows like this one.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. And I mean, he just started promoting me right away. And I mean, I've never been in the acting industry or anything. I took an acting class down in Orlando at a place called Class Act Studios, which they're not paying me to say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. If you're in the Orlando area and you're looking for a great acting class to start out at, that place is the best place. They're called Class Act Studios, and they're wonderful instructors. They're both actors themselves, and they teach the Sanford Meisner um, technique of acting. And but I've Steve has been trying to get me into voiceovers and stuff. As a matter of fact, I'm working with a voiceover coach right now out of Greenville, South Carolina, named Diane Merritt, and she's a wonderful vocal coach.
Okay.
And going to be doing that for a while, and then going to cut a voice demo, and hopefully get some decent voiceover work.
What was the first impression that you ever did?
Ringo Starr. Oh,
So I mean,
definitely
but like,
Ringo
so
Starr.
you did the impersonation, but like, what, even as a kid, like, were you watching something on TV and you imitated it and said, I could try to do that? Like, for me, I remembered, uh, it was over a weekend. I said, I want to do a Kermit the Frog impression, but I couldn't get the throat. I couldn't get
Right.
it, and it took a little bit. And I'm like, hi ho, hi ho. And then all of a sudden, it just hit me one day. I was like, hi ho, Kermit the Frog. And it got to that point where I'm like, I did it, and I put the work in, and
Right.
then it starts to become, and you find different things. But one of the big things with impressions is usually people do an impression of somebody else doing an impression.
Exactly. That's how Rich Little even says it. When you do an impression, it's actually you doing Rich Little doing an impression of
Mm-hmm.
somebody. And you were speaking of Kermit the Frog. I can do Miss Piggy to a certain extent, but I haven't tried it in a while. But if
We'll
you
have to
want, I
take it
can
out
give
on
it my
tour
best
then.
shot. If you want, I can give it my best shot.
But well, but it's funny with the impressions though, because I've had an opportunity to meet Billy West, and Billy
Right.
West is he did Ren and Stimpy. He did both characters. Originally just did Stimpy, but then he took over Ren when John Kricfalusi was kicked out by Nickelodeon.
Oh yeah.
But the reason he did Stimpy is, and a lot of his characters are somewhat offshoots of the Three Stooges. So the Stimpy
Hmm.
character is Larry Fine, as he calls it, an amped up Larry Fine. So anytime
Exactly.
I would hear him do Larry Fine, and then I would want to impersonate it, I'm just doing Billy West's version of doing Larry Fine. Hey Mo, I peed on my shoe, and that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
so you're just taking on somebody else's impression. But the one big thing is, how do you make that your own? How do you know
Yeah.
that this is not just Billy West, or it's not just June Foray's, and it's not just Mel Blanc's impression of this? How do you make it Zach Arnold's impression? How do you make it Tony Mazur's impression?
Well, I mean, one of the impressions I do actually is Paul Lynde from the Hollywood Squares. He was the center square for the longest time. And I've seen so many people do an impression of him. But I always look for a trademark, something that gives that person their character. And a lot of people, even I'm not going to talk down about Rich Little by any means, but what he does is Paul Lynde, he tends to do Paul Lynde like, oh, get a day job. That's disgusting. But what I do is I look for that vibration in Paul Lynde's voice. So when I say something, I'll be like, oh my goodness. No wonder it's so bad. And
What was
so
I love that too, because him, Charles Nelson Riley, and Rip Taylor, for whatever reason, the rather flamboyant homosexuals of the 70s all had that like quivering voice, like, oh my goodness, like you said, it's
yeah,
like like oh, and
right.
or Alice Ghostly was another one. But it was kind of funny how all of those, that it just seemed like that was the quote unquote gay voice of the 70s,
It
and that
was.
therefore, because of that, everybody thinks they can do a Paul Lynde impression.
Right. But I mean, it's harder than you think, though. I mean, it's much harder to like because when I'm still having trouble doing Johnny Carson. I could never get his voice down. And I mean, they say you got to feel in the character and stuff. And so Johnny, I'm still trying to work out the kinks with. Now I've been trying to perfect my Ed Sullivan. And if you go on my YouTube channel,
We're
you can
going with
see a
all the
little
current
short.
impressions.
Yeah, the YouTube short there. I was in the elevator actually in my hotel in Spartanburg just a few weeks ago, and I was looking in the reflection of the wall there in the hotel room or the elevator, excuse me, and I just started, you know, and and I just started going, now tonight, live right here on this very stage. Let me tell you, we're gonna have a really, 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 really big shoe, something like that. And but I've been perfecting it here and there. There's a lot of them that I'm still trying to work on. Um, what else do I have? Jimmy Stewart is one of my greatest that I
Let's
can
hear it.
do. Jimmy Stewart. Now, let me see if I can get the facts straight here now. Uh, Your Honor, I've been sitting in court now for 3 days, and I just don't know what's been going on. Everybody's been talking at once, and nobody said a word. Okay, now let's see if we can get the facts straight now. Now, they're saying that the knife that was used to kill Sir Regimen was the same knife that was found in Miss Markle's back. However, the facts don't speak for themselves. No, 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 no. Somebody's lying here.
See, it's funny because I've talked about this before about what Saturday Night Live does, or at least they don't do now, is they have to get on air. And
Right.
now that the writer's strike, now that they are going live, they have these people who do the impressions, but there's not a lot of, I guess, quote unquote, love behind them. And
Right.
I've heard Martin Short tell the story about him doing the Jerry Lewis impression, which is it's not just an impression. He's not doing ladies.
Hey, ladies.
He's like all over the stage. Like when he does
Right.
the Champs-Élysées on SCTV. And it's so funny because he's doing the impression, but he's doing a couple of Jerrys. He's doing the one where everyone says it's the lozenge in his mouth, where it's like, as a filmmaker. And he
Right.
does that. But the reason you're able to do an impression like that is because you actually have some kind of affection for that person. And I think
Right.
those are the best impressions. You can't just say, hey, this weekend you're going to do Donald Trump on Saturday Night Live. Okay, I guess I got to brush up on my Trump-ese or the cadence.
Yeah.
It's a lot of it is, I am a big Jerry Lewis fan. I'm a big Jimmy Stewart fan. I'm a big Johnny Carson fan. It's taken me years to get to this point and perfect the tone, the cadence, the
Right.
jokes, and finding out a little bit more about who the person is. Maybe the dialect, maybe where, Johnny was from Iowa. Maybe there's a little bit of Iowa that goes along with it, or other people who've come from the middle of the country. And that's
Right.
what makes those impressions so much more enjoyable. Dave Thomas was another one also from SCTV I had on my podcast. He does the perfect Bob Hope impression. Perfect.
Bob Hope's a hard one to get down, though.
But it's perfect. I mean, like obviously you can clearly tell it's Dave Thomas doing it, but
Right.
I can't. There have been so many people who do that. Hey, isn't that something? Everyone does it. Bob Texaco Hope, but
Right.
he does the perfect impression, and it dates the impression of, here's the young Bob, here's the Vietnam War Bob, and here's the 1990s Bob when he should have hung it up 20 years ago. And
Right.
it works. And he said, the only reason I could do something like that is I actually really I love Bob Hope. I loved his movies. I loved his specials and everything. And the reason I was able to do that is because I did have a soft spot for him.
Right. And I mean, I love Bob Hope as well. I mean, I've seen what was that one that he and Bing Crosby did together? Morocco or
Road
whatever
to
it was.
Morocco,
The Road
yes.
to Morocco.
And then the road to every place else on earth.
Oh yeah, I saw that and I loved it. But I saw it maybe last time I saw it was, I guess, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So I mean, obviously I haven't seen it in a few years, but I'd love to pull it out of my DVD archives and watch it again. Another one of my favorite movies, also with one of my favorite comedy duos, was Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon.
Of course.
Grumpy Old Man, Odd Couple 2, but I have yet to see The Fortune Cookie. I cannot believe I did not see that one yet.
That's the football one where he's the cameraman.
I believe so, yes.
I think that was filmed in my neck of the woods here in Cleveland, Ohio, a little bit.
Oh, wow.
Because I think the Browns were involved. Yeah, it's the one thing is, you mentioned about Lemon and Matthau, and of course you could even throw in Jack Klugman as well, and Tony Randall, is that in those days, we had TV shows where you had Will Jordan, you had Marilyn Michaels, you had John Biner, who's also been on my podcast, and
oh wow,
Rich Little, Frank Gorshin. These were impressionists, and there was at one time you would do like, so if Johnny Carson walked into a bar, it would sound something like this, and then comedy evolved, or I don't know, maybe devolved by after the 1980s, where you were considered a hack. And, I do stand up and I never hear anybody do impressions of anybody on stage. Rarely. Like maybe Pablo Francisco does a little bit of that. I've seen him, or of course, Frank Caliendo. But for the most part, comics, it's like that's the hack thing. It's either you pull a guitar out on stage or you're doing impressions of something. And I don't understand why that's become hack, because at one time that was the thing you did. It's like, here's what it would sound like if Jack Nicholson were the captain of a pirate ship, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And we don't
I
have
mean,
that nowadays.
right. I mean, you nowadays, I mean, I do it the old-fashioned way, like Rich Little does. I'll go up there and I'll say a line at somebody, or I'll sing a little bit of a song, but I'll turn it into a comedy sketch. And another one of my favorites to do is Andy Rooney. You remember him, 60
Oh yeah.
Minutes, that
Mm-hmm.
little lazy curmudgeon you'd see at the end. But the thing is with Andy was he was always wondering things. I mean, for an intellectual, he sure as heck questions a lot of things, like, um, why do they sterilize needles for lethal injections? I don't understand that at all. And while we're on the subject of lethal injections, here's something else that puzzles me. Why do they conduct autopsies on condemned inmates? Do you ever think about this? This is stupid. Isn't it obvious what the cause of death really was? Dumb, just dumb.
I mean it's funny because when you're a comic who does impressions, it's if you can nail the impression, that's like the first part. The rest is now the material. What can you do to make
Right.
it, again, like I said, your own impression? And I know John Biner used to do this bit where he was doing the Ed Sullivan show, but they only had 5 minutes to do the show. So they
Right.
would bring Martin and Lewis, lady, do this. Okay, all right, Topo Gijo comes out, and all
Right.
this, and then he does the Johnny Mathis impression, and it's really good. So it's how you can make it your own. Yeah, okay, you can do an impression, but what can you do to make people laugh? That's going to be like an homage to the person you're impersonating.
Right.
That and make it your own. Frank Caliendo does that too when he's on
Oh
stage, where
yeah.
you can't just go, I'm going to do John Madden's voice, or I'm going to do Adam Sandler or Chris Rock. It's
Yeah.
how do you make it into a comedy bit? What if you invited all those characters on stage and it turns into like a multiple personality show?
Exactly. I mean, that's where you have to be careful with doing impressions these days, because I mean, you're going to get the critics that are saying, "Oh, he doesn't sound anything like them," or it's not funny. I mean, he's doing the voice and it's not funny. He doesn't have any humorous material. So, but then, there's other people that'll say, like Steve told me this, for example, Steve Joyner. He told me, you're going to have your critics, but it doesn't really matter what they think. What matters is that you believe in yourself, and that you believe that you're bringing the audience the entertainment that you feel they enjoy. And if they don't
Mm-hmm.
like it, then that's on them, because you're going to have your haters, you're going to have your followers. But in the end, it all stems from one thing, which is believing in yourself.
I guess the biggest thing when it comes to doing impressions nowadays, because again, you're mentioning people now that Jimmy Stewart's been dead since 1997, Johnny
Right.
Carson since '05,
Mm-hmm.
Ed Sullivan for about 50 years now.
Oh yeah.
And it obviously, and Paul Lynde's been dead for over 40 years. These
Right.
are, but they're people who had distinct voices. And a
Yes.
lot of it came from that mid-Atlantic, the almost a mix between a New England and a posh British accent that like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, what are you doing here, you lousy screw? And, that kind of stuff where it was, which I read about the Katharine Hepburn impression and the voice is that it was, if you're British or you're from Georgia, that you had a shared dialect, a shared inflection that you were going on stage with, and that everybody kind of knew. And that's why all those 30s, 40s, early 50s movies kind of sounded like that leading up to Marlon Brando and
Right.
James Dean. And the problem is nowadays, is again, we mentioned all those acts that, and the acts and the entertainers that are long gone, they're long dead. And today's Hollywood doesn't have that. Like,
They don't have a trademark.
yeah,
They're all playing the same character in every single thing.
like
Whereas John
do
Wayne,
a.
Jimmy Stewart, all of them would play they were so different in every single role they played.
Can you do a
Whereas,
George Clooney impression right now?
what's that?
Can you do George Clooney? And
No,
and
no,
my
I can't.
answer to that is, who can? Like if somebody goes on stage says, "Here's my George Clooney," how would you know the difference? How would you know the difference
Exactly.
between that? Someone goes on stage, "I'm Ryan Gosling, I'm
Hmm.
Leonardo DiCaprio, I'm insert almost anybody, male, female, anybody." And we
Right.
just don't have those personalities that have that distinct voice, that distinct background. Uh, and I think a lot of it is because of the lack of star power, where back in the day, and I talked about this in my podcast last week with my friend Ashley, is you went to go to the movies back in the day because you saw the star, not necessarily the movie. The movie could stink. If you were a big Humphrey Bogart fan, but you knew Humphrey Bogart had a movie coming out, this movie could bomb. This movie could be terrible. You walk away and say, that wasn't really that good. But you
Right.
still went because of who the person you were going to see that was starring in it. And I
Exactly.
just don't see we have that kind of star power nowadays. And
No, we don't.
probably why we don't have impression power either.
Right. And I mean, you mentioned Katharine Hepburn a little bit ago. Um, she had a very, very distinct voice, which, I mean, if you were to hear her on a radio, you'd think that's Katharine Hepburn. Because, I mean, she had that, that
A
jittery
little
sound in
shaky
her
voice.
voice. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
And
you're my knight in shining armor.
right, yes. Yes, and I do yoga all the time. However, if you want to talk to me, you're gonna have to stand on your head. So, I mean, another voice that I really love doing, and I mean, I throw people off with this all the time. Um, I usually use it when somebody's irritating the living crap out of me. You remember Dr. Ruth Westheimer?
Oh yes,
She
Dr.
was
Ruth.
the little curmudgeon sex therapist back in the day. I somebody can stand there and just irritate the crap out of me, and out of nowhere they'll try to get some sort of reaction out of me, and eventually I'll just look at them and go, it's not a very nice thing to be bothering people like this. I think you should just go away. And they just stand there like, and then they just turn around and walk away. Then they're looking at each other like, who is that? But I'm standing there laughing because I caught them off guard with a voice. And it's like you can catch people off guard so easily. And the reaction you get out of them is sometimes they'll laugh, sometimes they'll yell back, or sometimes they'll just do what those people I was telling you about did, what the
You mentioned Dr. Ruth, and I shouldn't do this just because I cursed Richard Mole from Night Court. I just
Mhm.
talked about him last week. I said, well, Richard Mole's still alive. Nope, not anymore. So I can't say that because Dr. Ruth is still alive.
Right.
As of this recording, she was born 1928. She's
Hmm.
95 years old. So, yeah. So,
It's amazing that you said that too, because I had a similar experience, and to this day, my fiance and my stepkids, they still hold this grudge against me. We were traveling. My fiance and I were traveling down the Florida Turnpike one night, coming home, and we were talking about people that are so old that are still alive, and I said, I can't believe Muhammad Ali is still around. And the very next night, the news flash came on. He'd passed away. And
yep.
everybody's like, you killed him. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
it's always that. It's everybody has to jump on. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of people I've done that to. Don Rickles was one of them. Gerald
oh, Don
Ford, I've
Rickles, that
remembered.
hockey puck. Yeah.
So, you like, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 37 now.
So you're 37, but you have this appreciation for old Hollywood. Was that something that you were raised with? That you watch maybe like Turner Classic Movies or AMC back in the day? Did your parents get you onto it? Like, how did you get that appreciation for
It
the
was
old, like the golden age of Hollywood?
I'm gonna blame my parents and my late uncle on that one. Because I mean, when we were like, for example, with my music influence, we would be riding in the car, and my dad and mom would always have the oldies station on from like the 50s and the 60s. And my late uncle, who passed away sadly in 2018, he brought me up on the Beatles. And the first time I ever saw any of the Beatles, period, was in the kids show Shining Time Station with Ringo
Yeah,
as Mr.
Ringo
Conductor.
before he had to go to rehab.
Yeah.
How
Actually, I
weird is
think he had just gotten out of rehab at
yeah.
the time.
Yeah, how weird
Yeah.
is it that Ringo had to go to rehab and everything, and then but he's the conductor in Shining Time Station with Thomas the Tank Engine, and then they get another guy who also had problems in George Carlin. So it's like, and
Yeah.
then they bring Alec Baldwin. Or like, God, is there a
Anyways.
curse with this show?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then but I was that little at that little age that I thought that Mr. Conductor was actually in real life 18 inches tall. I thought Ringo was actually in real life 18 inches tall. And I remember,
He's not the tallest guy, but I think he might be a little taller than that.
yeah, exactly. I think he maybe about an inch or so. But the but I remember saying to my mom, I was like, because I was like, I really like Mr. Conductor. And she was like, oh, well, you know who that is, right? I'm like, no. She goes, his name is Ringo Starr. He was the drummer for the Beatles. I'm like, who are the Beatles? She was like, they're your Uncle Greg's favorite band. And as I grew up, I learned to appreciate their music. And then in 2011 or 2012, uh, my parents and my uncle and I took a trip overseas on the Beatle pilgrimage tour. And we went to 3 locations there. We went to Liverpool, London, and Hamburg. And on our first night in Liverpool, we went over to the Cavern Club, and
Oh yes.
I was speaking to a gentleman there. I didn't know he was the headliner of the night on the stage, but I was telling him that I was, because at the time I was playing with Beatlemania: The Invasion, and I had mentioned to him that I was a tribute artist from the States, and I just went about my business and stuff, hanging out, and then this gentleman gets up on stage and he says, "I understand we have." I was talking to a gentleman a little bit ago, says he's in a tribute band in the States. Or are you still here? And I went, I'm right here. He goes, you want to come on up and sing a song? So I'm like, what? Because being invited up on the stage of the world-renowned Cavern Club. And funny story about that, my uncle was actually over at the gift shop area getting souvenirs like T-shirts and stuff. And he heard me being called up to the stage, and he told me he was thinking, that little son of what a lucky guy he is. And then I got up there and I said to the musician that night, his name was Paul David Jones, and I said, is it okay if my uncle comes up here with me, because he's the one who got me into this in the first place? He goes, sure. What's your uncle's name? I said, just call him Uncle Greg. He gets on the microphone and goes, Mr. Zach here would like his Uncle Greg to come up here with him. Greg told me when he heard that, he had a pile, like a handful of T-shirts and stuff, and the employee there, is still getting stuff out of the display cases for him. When he heard that, he said he just tossed her all the stuff and said, I'll be right back, and ran up onto the stage. And the cavern has those really like low
ceilings.
archways that go up to the stage. He almost hit his head on the arch heading up there.
Do you
But
guys
he
sing
said
it don't come easy?
no, we did Imagine, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we did Imagine. Paul David Jones played the guitar, and my Uncle Greg and I sang. We did the raw one mic thing like the Beatles did. And I have some photos of it if you want me to send them to you to put up here for on visual for
Post
the
production, yes.
podcast.
Well,
Yes.
that's what's interesting, because for the Beatles, I was somebody that I wasn't necessarily raised on Beatles. I knew about them, but um, my feeling was because I love the Beatles later stuff. I like
Yes.
the more experimental stuff. I like the Ravi Shankar era of where they were trying a couple of different things. I mean, there was some stuff that was way out there, but
Yeah.
like something like While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Absolutely. It makes everything else, like I Want to Hold Your Hand, just pales that in comparison. You're talking about a band that in just a couple of years developed that much from being teeny bopper band on Ed Sullivan to, yeah, here's George Harrison really shredding on the guitar if he needs to. And it's fantastic. And that's where I
Right.
think a lot of people who end up being Beatle haters, or they say they're overrated, have to understand, they have to look at the whole scope of it. But I mean, I could be wrong here, but it seemed like they did a lot of that early pop stuff just to kind of get popular. And then they're like,
Right.
okay, we've achieved this level of popularity. Now we could do what we really want.
Let's take it to the next step. And Paul McCartney even said that, the touring really got to them because they had all these great ideas for all these unique sounds and instruments in mind, but they couldn't hear themselves playing over the audience. And they were starting to have tension between them. So they said, we want to just retreat into the studio. We want to lay down an album that is going to be so advanced, so incredible, something that nobody has ever heard before, something that will literally take our listeners to another dimension when they hear it. And that turned out to be Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which still to this day is the best-selling album of all time.
And I assume you're of the camp, since you do Ringo impersonations, that you think that you do you fight with people online that say that Ringo wasn't a good drummer?
I used to, but I stay out of that now because I don't care what other people say. I know in my heart what the truth is, and as long as I know it, I don't care what the world thinks of it.
He kept great
Um,
time. That's all you need,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I
And
mean, he may not be Charlie Watts, but there were two different types of drummers.
right. I mean, Keith Moon, for example. I mean, Keith Moon and Ringo got along great. And
Probably a little
his
too
son
much.
Zach is now with the Who. Yeah. His son Zach Starkey is now the drummer of the Who. And Ringo said that Keith Moon was Uncle Keith to Zach. And but he never looked down on other drummers. He never looked down on other musicians. He would offer advice to people, and he would, if you wanted to ask him a question or something, he'd answer. And he'd say, I just want to help, up and coming musicians to be able to advance themselves. And, I mean, granted, he doesn't do that anymore because he doesn't, accept fan mail. But he's a really nice guy in reality,
Whose post Beatles career did you enjoy more?
though. That's a hard one. That's a really, really hard one. I can't just pick one, honestly, Tony. I'd have to say I love them. I honestly love them all.
Because they all went in
Um,
different directions. Because Paul did the more radio friendly stuff. You had
right,
John experimented, but there were a couple of different things that he did that were interesting. Of course, not long after the Beatles broke up, My Sweet Lord comes out by George Harrison.
yes,
And then Ringo, for how many years has been doing the All-Star Band.
right,
And I think Ringo's always had that self-awareness of, look, I realize I'm not the front man of the Beatles. I realize that I'm the drummer, but I also have a load of friends and family and everything to be a part of. Let's go out on tour and play these old songs. Let's
right.
let's
And
bring Rick Derringer on tour. Let's bring
Edgar
some of
Winter,
these other people. Jeff Lynne
St-
from ELO.
Steve Lukather was just with him of Toto,
Mm-hmm.
and Gary, what was his name? Oh gosh,
Gary
Greg
Wright.
Raleigh of
Oh,
yes, Gary Wright, Greg Raleigh, the lead singer of Santana, Richard Page, of course, of Mr. Mister, really great singer, and of course, yeah, there was Rick Derringer, and he had Colin Hay from Men at Work, Paul Carrack from Mike and the Mechanics and Ace, and he had, oh my gosh, the list goes on, and Sheila E., the world renowned drummer, the Latin drummer, Sheila E., she was with
yep.
him
Todd
several
Rundgren, I
times.
believe, as well.
Yes,
Yeah, so
yes,
I mean, it's just that's what made it so great. And then of course then you had the traveling Wilburys, and you had like George Harrison coming back in the '80s. He had that "Got My Mind Set on You," and you're like,
right.
But here's what I didn't know, and I don't know if you know this. They used to play that during the Beatles era as
What?
kind of like a goofy in between songs, or like as a warm up, and that
Mhm.
song had been floating around for a while, and he finally recorded it in the 80s.
Right. I mean, all things, but also all things must pass. Backtracking to the 70s,
Hmm.
one of the big reasons I learned that George was so keen at the time to get out of the Beatles was because he had finally had this inspiration of all this songwriting, and he developed a unique way to write songs. And but however, with all of the songs by Lennon and McCartney, it was so hard to get one Harrison track on there. And eventually, John said something on Abbey Road, which Frank Sinatra has coined as his favorite Lennon McCartney song,
Hmm.
and not Harrison. But um, he John said this one's going to be a single because George did wonderful on this one. And then, but then George had this entire backlog of things. He had All Things Must Pass, which they did rehearse in the Let It Be sessions. Which also, if you see the Peter Jackson documentary, get that. George actually plays some of All Things Must Pass in as a warm up and stuff. But you can see the other three just are like, it's not for this album. So that's why All Things Must Pass was released as a uh, three record album, because he had
Okay.
all this backlog, and Phil Spector said to him, hey, get it out there. That way you can make room to write new songs. And so he said, yeah, you're right. And
The
he didn't like
the
Wah Wah at first, though. He did not like the song Wah Wah
mhm.
for whatever reason. And Eric Clapton said, well, I think it's awesome. And George said, well, then you have it on your album. But George was
Well, they
one
do
of
have good
those guys.
sandwiches.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, I wanted to get back about a little bit more impressions and voice acting and stuff like that. So, for folks who are only listening to this right now, you're a gentleman of Asian descent.
Yes. I'm
So,
from Seoul, South Korea.
do you find that could be a potential like stumbling block, like a blockade for you as you try to advance? Or do you think nowadays that it almost doesn't matter? Like I can do an impression and I can be behind a microphone and people can hear me and it doesn't really matter what I look like in real life. Like how do you feel about that? Is that something that you're concerned about or are you not?
In a way, I am, but I look at it this way. If I'm up there to entertain you, I'm not up there for you to judge me by my looks. I mean,
Yeah.
what I'm there for is to entertain you and give you guys a good laugh. And if you're gonna say, "Oh, well, he can't do that," that's not right. He's Asian. You know, I don't go into the whole like race like thing, but
Mm.
I would take that as offensive
Because
because
I mean, over time now we've had a lot of people like Mike Henry from Family Guy trade in he was a white guy voicing Cleveland, who's a black
right.
gentleman, and now a black gentleman is voicing Cleveland because of how that goes. How did you feel about that? And like, does that matter to you? Like, does there need to be more representation? Like, if there's an Asian character that's voiced by a white person or anybody else, does that bother you, or do you
I
feel that could be your potential in there?
I think that honestly, anyone who has talent, okay, anyone who has talent and who believes in entertaining for a living, or anyone just entertaining in general, everyone has the right to be whatever they want to be, whoever they want to be. And it shouldn't matter what people think of you. And I just think it's ridiculous how some people can be so narrow-minded to judge like that. But in reality, I'm a little concerned, but overall I could care less.
Because we've seen that
So
over time where I remember there was do you remember Super Dave?
Super Dave Osborne,
Yeah.
yes.
So he had the show Bizarre and then had his own spin-off show and then even had a cartoon show that was in the early 90s. And his sidekick is a Asian guy named Fuji.
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot what the guy's name was, but a Canadian actor. He just passed away, I think, like last year, maybe a couple of months ago. And his voice that he was using for Fuji was really, really like Charlie Chan over the top Asian. And
Yeah.
but because it was on Showtime and in the 1980s, things were a little less PC than they are nowadays. When they brought the same character to I think I don't remember what channel it was, but it was the production company was DIC, DIC, and the
Yes.
Super Dave show. There was a huge amount of complaints for a kids show to have a wildly stereotypical Asian voice that's used for the Fuji character. And I
Right.
think it only lasted about a full season, so like 12, 13 episodes. And halfway through, they had to change the Fuji voice to a little less truly like you hear that now, like in a kid's show, you're like, whoa, I watched this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, they got away with that too for 7 episodes.
Right. I mean, talking about like, also, I was just watching a video. This is sort of going along the lines of it, but I mean, it has to do with, crossing boundary lines, like with inappropriate language or inappropriate names and stuff. Dinosaurs in the 90s,
Hmm.
the Sinclair family. Kevin Clash played Baby Sinclair. And but he also played the reporter of the local news whose name was Howard Hand Up Me. And he made a good point. He said, I couldn't believe we got away with that in primetime television, but they did. And, I think there's a way to work around stuff like that, but a
Even
lot of,
Rocco's Modern Life, they went to the Choky Chicken for their
yeah,
fast food place. And you're like,
yeah,
wow, that I'm surprised they got away with there's a lot of innuendo in Rocco and some of those early Nickelodeon shows, but
right.
yeah, that's
There
hilarious.
is. I mean, there's always been that though. So, I mean, even Tiny Toon Adventures was seen as a poor version, a poor attempt at a Looney Tunes replication. But hey, kids loved it. I loved it. I still love it. I mean, if I can find reruns or anything, I'll watch it.
They did a good job of when they started bringing these back with Steven Spielberg and
Hmm.
was it Amblin or I don't remember, or it might have been DreamWorks. I'm not sure the production company, but they did a great homage of what they did with Tiny Toons and Animaniacs because they actually
Right.
went to the old Warner Brothers studios and had full orchestras the way the old Mel Blanc Looney Tunes were back in the day. So
Yeah. Yeah, they did.
it's not like they were just saying like, hey, let's update these characters, kind of what they're doing nowadays, where they're just really pale imitations of what they used to be. But
Yeah.
at least in the early 90s, they tried to keep that homage in the new golden age of animation.
Right, right. And I mean, Spielberg even said that himself. He said, he wanted to keep in the spirit of the original Looney Tunes. Because I mean, Mel Blanc was a friend of his. He loved Mel Blanc. But unfortunately at the time, Mel Blanc he was up there in age and he was on his way out. Um, but I know Spielberg is all original. I mean, that's also I'm thinking also that might be why he's not really doing much these days because he sticks to the original formats and stuff, and people are saying, well, that stuff's on its way out. I mean, look, we've got AI now and stuff. But it's funny that you should mention Spielberg and Amblin because we were talking Jerry Lewis earlier, and Jerry Lewis actually uh, taught a class, an acting class.
Yes,
And Steven Spielberg was one of his students.
along with George Lucas.
Yes, George Lucas as well. And of course, Jerry Lewis invented the video assist feature, which now studios cannot live without. And it's Steven Spielberg even said himself there should be a note on the on every camera or every monitor. Jerry Lewis invented this. I happen to agree with them. I mean, Jerry was one of the greatest movie actors of all time. I mean, his behind the scenes, his life and his family life was a dark one, but on screen he was brilliant.
It's funny you say that because it took me many, many years, almost until a couple of years before he died, to get Jerry Lewis.
Oh,
And
wow.
kind of like with Bob Hope was for one particular generation of silent generation, born in the 30s. You grew up, maybe you were a war veteran, and Bob Hope flew overseas and
Right.
brought, hey, it's Lola Heatherton. You know, I say that's the old SCTV joke that Dave
Yeah.
Thomas did, but obviously Joey Heatherton, Lola Falana. But they would do all these different things, and like Bob Hope was like beloved by one generation, and then it took until Vietnam that people were like, I don't like Bob Hope anymore. Not a big fan.
Yeah.
I don't like him. He's too war hawkish. He's too this, too pro Nixon. He's too whatever. And you kind of see how certain generations just dropped off with that. And the same with Jerry Lewis. There was,
Yes.
for people born in the 50s, Jerry Lewis was God. Like,
Mm-hmm.
whether lowercase or capital G, he was God
Right.
to them. And then after that, it wasn't Jerry Lewis Day anymore. And he was just known as the telethon guy for so many years. And
Yeah.
so I knew him as telethon guy. And I remember that one year he was bloated on the steroids and stuff. It didn't look good, but
Yeah.
it took me to really appreciate it, about who Jerry Lewis was, and more than just King of Comedy, because he was just playing himself in that movie.
Right.
But
Right.
I'll tell you, there was one clip in particular, and it was a Family Guy clip, I believe from The Errand Boy, that Family Guy did Peter. Peter Griffin was doing Jerry Lewis in all of his mannerisms during that scene, the pantomime scene.
Right.
And somebody put it side by side, and it was so funny to watch Jerry Lewis. I might have to actually pull it up if I can. That Jerry was more cartoonish than the cartoon.
Yeah.
It was incredible to watch that.
Yes, it was. And I mean, Jerry was just comic. He was the clown, But when he did the Nutty Professor, the reason he came up with Buddy Love's character is because with Dean Martin, Dean was the straight man and the cool crooner, and Jerry was just a crazy kid. And in the Nutty Professor, Professor Kelp was just this rotten scientist that knew nothing about anything.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, he needed somebody else in the film to kind of sort of complement that character, but he wanted it more like Dean, which is
Yeah.
why he made the character Buddy Love.
And Buddy Love was what kind of Jerry Lewis always wanted to be, the
Right.
womanizer, which in a lot of ways it was what he was like in real life. But for folks watching on the audio, I'm playing the video of Jerry Lewis and Peter back and forth doing this, and it truly is amazing that they couldn't even get the cartoon to look as cartoonish as Jerry Lewis.
Right.
It's truly incredible, but they also do a good job of animating it. But it was when I was watching this clip, I got it. I completely got, because pantomime was at one time, there was a big thing, and that's how a lot of people started getting a little bit of local notoriety in New York. But it took me a while, and it's amazing. It took me 70 years since Jerry Lewis got famous for me to go, I get it now. Oh my goodness. And there's a lot of those that to truly appreciate from people. And you and I are roughly around the same age. I'm 35.
Right.
But I was also raised on a lot of this stuff, the golden age of Hollywood, and really enjoying it. And also looking at today's Hollywood by comparison and going, yeah, this is why I keep going back to the old days.
Yeah. Because I mean, somebody says, hey, do an impression of, Dustin Hoffman. And I'll say, Dustin Hoffman doing what?
Or Al
They,
Pacino's. Al Pacino's the big one.
oh
It's
yeah, I
which
mean,
Al Pacino? You want Godfather Pacino, or do you want Son of a Woman Pacino?
right. Or do you want, or I mean, do you want, Dick Tracy, Big Boy Caprice, or whatever? I mean, it's just everything with today's actors is the same. And I mean, they might look like they're playing different characters, but when you stop and you listen to what they're doing and saying, you think this is nothing new. It's nothing. They're the same old character, just with a different name practically.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I can't believe that you know the golden age of Hollywood is, of course, long gone. But I don't know why Hollywood has become the way it has, because I think our influences in our motion picture industry was booming back during the golden age of Hollywood. And nowadays it's just like everything. I mean, Marvel and everything like that.
Star
That's
Wars.
Yeah, I mean, that's all fine and dandy. But I mean, when we talk about like actual films, like I mean, I know they're coming out with a lot of like biopics now and stuff like that. But I mean, I'll be honest with you, Tony, Rocket Man with Taron Egerton as Elton John, that was pretty good.
So well,
As a
same with
matter of fact,
Bohemian Rhapsody with
yeah, oh
Rami
yes,
Malek.
and Elton John actually picked Taron Egerton for the part. He handpicked him himself because he heard him singing a version of your song, and he said he sounds more like me than I do.
Yeah.
So
Well, and you mentioned about Hollywood, but I hate to say a fairly simplistic and easy answer to this, but I think it's just we have too many options now for entertainment. At
we
one
do.
time, you wanted to take a date out on Friday night, you go to the movies.
I
What else
couldn't
are you going
agree
to do?
more.
You go to the movies, you go out to eat. That's basically it. Other than going to the back of the car.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah. Or
you
if
know,
you go out to eat first, then you go to the movie, you're going to the bathroom every like 10 minutes because that dinner's catching up to you.
oh yeah, oh
Those
I feel it
burritos
literally.
and the
But
spicy sausage.
that's what it was, that we had so few options for entertainment, and that's why how many millions of people, like tens of millions of people, watched the MASH finale, that watched
Right.
Roots. They were other than the Super Bowl, it was a collective place where it doesn't matter your skin color, doesn't matter creed, doesn't matter race, doesn't matter sexuality, anything like that. We all got together and shared this common cultural moment. We don't have that
Right.
anymore because, and it's like that in sports. I've talked about this many times too. The commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, just came out and said he's afraid that young people are not going to have an opportunity to watch the NBA now because people don't have cable. And I'm like, well, first of all, Commissioner, people can still watch the NBA. They're doing so illegally, so they'll find
Yeah.
different options to do that. But second of all, if you want to watch, like I remember during COVID, that they shut a lot of the leagues down. So what I did was I watched old games. I can go
Hmm.
back and say, let me see, I'll find how about an Oakland A's game from 1988 where they faced the California Angels? And sure enough, I could find that of teams of guys I grew up watching and everything like that. I could watch a full game if I want to, and I can skip ahead. So we have so many other options as far as entertainment that goes against sports, it goes against movies. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
podcasts like this. I mean, we've done basically an hour's worth of material right now that some people would have used this just 5 years ago. Oh,
Right.
I'm going to catch up on my shows or I'm going to watch a movie. Instead, they're going to watch a podcast like this on YouTube
Hmm.
because we have so many different options. And I think the behemoth that is YouTube and all these other options are pretty detrimental to the old guard.
It is. It is. But I mean, frankly, about YouTube, though, which I can say in its defense, however, is, so many people out there have such an aspiration to make something out of themselves, to be a star. Whereas YouTube kind of gives you that platform to be able to establish yourself. And I mean, some people, they found a lot of, musicians and rappers and stuff from YouTube. They found, other actors and stuff from YouTube. And I mean, just giving yourself a platform on YouTube, gets you out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of people are on the go. They can't sit back and watch TV, so they'll listen to a podcast while they're on their
Hmm.
way to work, they're working out, they're at work. They can't sit around and watch TV all day, and that's kind
Right.
of one of the things that really harms Hollywood. And but you will, when the collective you will go see a Marvel movie because it's in 3D, it's at the IMAX theater, and it's $20, and you have the glasses to watch and everything. It turns into like a whole spectacle. It's an event. So that's why
Yeah,
people
exactly.
enjoy going there. That you can't. What is something you can't get anywhere else? However, the days of the rom-com, those are Netflix only. They're on
Hmm.
Hulu only, Amazon only, or you can watch them what, 31 days of December, because they'll do Christmas movies with the same concept. It's
Right.
like, you don't need the rom-com. You don't need to go to the theater and say, hey, let's see the new Julia Roberts movie. No, that's not a thing anymore.
Exactly. I mean, but back in the day, it was all, I mean, when, for example, like the Alfred Hitchcock films, with like Vertigo with Jimmy Stewart and, North by Northwest, when those came out in theaters, I mean, back then also a lot of small towns only had one movie theater for the whole town. And it would be the talk of the town when the new Alfred Hitchcock or Ingrid Bergman film would show up, and people would line up out the door to wait to see that film, because that was back then. They were so into getting into a routine. Okay, well, Friday night's our movie afternoon. We're going to catch the matinee. Wash day on Saturday and chicken dinner on Sunday after church and stuff. I mean, back then it was all tradition. Nowadays it's like, oh, I just got home from work. I'm tired. I'm going to put my feet up and just, play a video game or, watch Netflix or whatever. But I mean, I don't agree with a lot of the things that are going on in the society of entertainment these days. I mean, granted, I wasn't around in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, but to be brought up by, an awesome family who was there and lived through that, I felt that as though I was experiencing it through that.
Exactly. It's a shame, but I guess we'll have to keep these ongoing. Well, Zach, I really appreciate you joining the podcast, and if you don't mind indulging me in some other impressions that you have, can you plug your YouTube, like all of your social media, anything like that, but in different voices?
Sure, I could do that. Well, this is Richard Millhouse Nixon. And I want to tell you, you need to go on and look at me on Facebook. You can just find me under Zach Arnold. However, there are several Zach Arnolds out there. So just be careful which one you choose. And then this is Ronald Reagan. You can find Zach Arnold on YouTube at The Incredible Impression. That's www.youtube.com/at The Incredible Impression. Now it's time for my nap. And one more politician.
That was a good Reagan.
Here. What's that?
That was a very good Reagan.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Phil here. Now, I know that you enjoyed this podcast today, okay? But the thing is, you need to go and check out Zach on Instagram at fab-zach for the number 4 EVR. That's Fab Zach forever.
That's great. By the way, I see this Mr. Rogers thing. It reminded me of I was a huge Mr. Rogers fan growing up, and we had some family friends. We went over to Idlewild Park over outside of Pittsburgh.
Right.
And for a couple of reasons, because I always wanted to try a Smiley cookie from Eaton Park, which, whatever.
The show was sponsored by that.
Yeah. And so I wanted to go, and they had the Storybook Forest and Mr. Rogers Neighborhood. So you got to go on the little train and go through the area with the castles. This was, maybe 1992, 93, something like that.
They have something similar to that at Kennywood, I think, or something.
Yeah,
like
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, Idlewild had this, which is was it Greensburg or Seton Hill or something like that in the area? I don't remember. And so we got to go on the train ride and go through Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and got to see King Friday and all. Like, oh, this is great. And then the ride was over, and I guess, and I remember doing this. I threw a fit because Mr. Rogers wasn't there that day.
Really?
And I was so mad. I still remember a little bit. I think my parents are trying to try to cheer me up, but also say like, you're embarrassing us in the park. Like, what's the matter with you? But I wasn't that kind of kid. I was actually a very good kid. Quiet. My brother was the malcontent, but I was the one who was way out of control because Mr. Rogers, where are you, Fred? You couldn't show up. We drove 2.5 hours from Ohio to come on over here, and you can't show up, you son of a. So no, but it just reminded me of it. I thought it was kind of funny. And
One more thing about Mr. Rogers, though, when I was a kid, I actually wrote a letter to him because I grew up in the Hershey, Pennsylvania area.
Okay.
And I actually, my mom typed up a letter to him. We both, sat down on the computer, the old Macintosh back in the day, and decided what we were going to say to him. And I sent it in. Well, at the time, I did not know that Fred answered every single piece of mail he received. And he sent me an entire packet of things, like with behind a little booklet of behind the scenes. He sent me pictures autographed by Mr. McFeely, Lady Aberlin, Handyman Negri, Chef Brockett, and one of him. And unfortunately, I don't have those anymore. But I did meet Mr. McFeely as well back in, I think it might have been 2000 or 1999. It was still when Fred was doing the shows, when he was filming. But it was near the latter end of the career of the series. But I met Mr. McFeely. I got his autograph, got some pictures with him, which I have no idea where those are either. But the one thing I still do have, and I cherish this with everything, I kept the letter that Mr. Rogers wrote to me. And
oh, you do have it. So, okay, good.
Yes, and he autographed it at the bottom. But what really gets to me nowadays, which, I didn't really think of it growing up, but, now that I'm grown up and I have so much of an appreciation for everything he's taught me and every other child that he's, educated and stuff. At the very bottom, he oh, of course, at the end of the show, he always said, you always make it a special day by just your being yourself, and would say there's only one person in the whole world like you. And I like you just the way you are. But he said that at the very end of the letter. But when he got to the last part where he said, and I like you just the way you are, he said, and Zachary, I like you just the way you are. And every time I pull that letter out and I read it, it really gets to me because
That's
I realize
fantastic.
he's talking directly to me and he's not addressing me through the television or anything. He's saying it on paper and saying it to me. So, I mean, for someone nowadays who says, hey, I wrote to Mr. Rogers, I heard back from him and stuff, to be able to say that, I have that letter still and I'm able to, look at it still and see that he liked me just the way I am. It's really emotional, especially considering that he's gone now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm mad at my mom now, my parents, for two reasons. One, because Mr. Rogers wasn't there at Idlewild Park that day in 1993. And I'm now mad at her that she didn't encourage me to write to him, because otherwise I would have gotten a letter back. So
I'm sorry.
after I hit end record here, she's going to get a real scathing see, I'm holding this grudge for 30 plus years right now. I'm just kidding, Mom, if you're watching or listening to
No,
this.
don't do that. Don't tell him Zach Arnold sent you on that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to find all these people in the comments are going to be like, well, I wrote to Mr. Rogers too, and now I'm going to get even more mad. So, but Zach,
or some people are going to say, I wrote to him and I didn't hear back.
Well, maybe I'll write to Eddie Dees and maybe he'll write to me.
Oh, he will.
I know. I had him on a couple of months ago. He was great. But this was a fun podcast, Zach. Thanks again for coming on, and I really appreciate it. Best of luck. Hope we can get you in there, do some voiceover stuff. You got some good stuff. You got good talent. And yeah, best of luck. Enjoy yourself down in Florida. And
thank you very much, Tony.
Wish I could head down to Florida permanently, but I just bought a home here, so I'm stuck here in Ohio for a little bit longer.
What's it like up there right now?
It's well, we're recording this the day before Halloween right now. It is currently 42 degrees, and tomorrow is going to be a high of 43 and potential snow for trick-or-treating. So for all the little kids in their Marvel costumes and their Barbie costumes, they have to wear a winter coat over it. So fun times in Cleveland today.
I hate to burst your bubble. It's 86 degrees here.
And you're in Orlando?
I'm about, I'd say, an hour northwest of Orlando. I'm right outside of Ocala. I'm actually in the Villages.
Okay. So
I'm at my
Ocala,
parents' house right now.
I believe Ocala was where Captain Midnight was from.
Yes. And I actually live in Ocklawaha, Florida, which, if you've heard of Ma Barker, the crime gang, it was Ma Barker and her two sons. They were bank robbers, and they ended up getting their end came in a shootout with the FBI in near right on the lakeside of Lake Weir in Ocklawaha. And as a matter of fact, I live less than 5 minutes from the historic house where the raid occurred.
Jeez,
so I live in a historic town.
Well, you're a long way from Hershey, Pennsylvania, but well, Zach, thanks again for doing the podcast, and I hope you folks out there enjoyed this podcast as well. Again, I am on Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur, TonyMazur. You get more podcasts per week and all my solo rants about whatever, God only knows what's going on in the world today. But yeah, so that's if you want more episodes. But if you just want to check out the free shows, the free YouTube, the free Rumble episodes, or just the free podcast wherever you get your podcasts, wait till next week. You got another one coming up next Wednesday. Thanks everybody for checking out the show. Leave me a 5-star review and rating, and if not, I don't really care. You enjoy yourselves, folks. Bye everybody.